Hey, my name's Jasmaya, and I'm about to interview Andy Carter, who is the new Borough Commander for Islington Camden. Today we're going to be talking about what is being done to combat violence against women. Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Jasmaya. I understand you're the new Borough Commander for Islington and Camden. How has your transition been into this role?
Thanks, Jazz. Really nice to meet you. Yeah, my name's Andy Carter. I'm Chief Superintendent and has been recently posted to be the BCU Commander for Camden and Islington. Been here for 9 weeks and it's a fantastic role, the opportunity to lead policing services across 2 really vibrant and busy boroughs. So I'm having a great time, still settling in, still finding my feet and getting out to meet people internally, lots of colleagues and all the things we do, but also residents of the community and the partners as well. So still very much getting to know how things work here, but I'm really excited about the future and what it means ahead.
I've seen that you've spoken a lot about violence against women. What kind of things do you have in place to make it better for young women?
So first and foremost, I'd say from a personal point of view, I'm a dad. I've got 3 children.
Okay.
And my middle child is a 19-year-old who's just started university at a city many miles away from here. So every day I think about my children's safety and how they are, and that translates into my job, my role, my professional view on life as well, and about how important it is that we keep everybody safe in Camden and Islington. That's our number 1 sort of mission, really, in its very sort of simplest format. And certainly events recently have highlighted how important it is that we keep people safe and that they're made to feel safe. There's lots going on, and we know that recent things that have happened have made people feel very unsafe, particularly women and girls who've been the focus of an awful lot of awful, terrible crimes and things like that. And it's really important for me to make sure that everyone here sees that as a priority. I know that we do internally, but it's really important that the communities, the residents in the boroughs here see how importantly we take it.
Obviously recently we had the Wayne Couzens incident, and a lot of people since then have lost a lot of faith in the police, particularly young girls and women. How do you intend to make people see that you're taking it seriously on the inside? Like, how are you making sure that police are keeping to the rules and making sure that everybody is safe, not only on the outside, but in the work environment? Yeah,
so that's a really good question and gets to the heart of certainly the fallout from that terrible incident. Probably the worst that I've known in my policing service, when a member of the organisation commits such a horrific act. And of course, lots of people then would question what is the police's role and what are they doing about internal standards and culture and professionalism and all the things that we hold really important to how we operate. So we know that in order to do that, we need to take a number of steps. Now there's a number of very sort of formal reviews going on within the organisation, but more locally here, it's about setting the expectations from me and the senior managers here and all the staff to everyone, so that they know what highest professional standards means. Okay. In the way that they look, the way that they behave, and the way that they do their job in terms of their effectiveness. And what that means really is that we have to ensure that we hold each other to account, so that we create a situation, an environment, a working place where people can challenge each other. So I know that talking to people, the officers do feel that they can call out things they're not happy about. We have an ability now to report things, wrongdoing. Outside, people looking into the organisation, they have lots of questions about how we're acting and what we're doing. So it's important that I and colleagues share the things that we're doing with all of our community so they can see. So I'm really emphasising the importance of us being transparent about that. So opening our doors here, people to come in and see what we're doing and how officers are operating on a day-to-day basis and seeing what they're doing. And the more that we do that, I'm confident that we can sort of improve that trust and confidence, and people will be able to relate to people better.
Okay, no, that's really good to hear. What about on the streets? How do you plan to make us feel safer?
So, first of all, the Met's relaunched a big plan around tackling violence against women and girls. So it's a big strategy. A lot of it builds on work that we've already been doing, but there's also lots of new initiatives, and there's kind of four main objectives for that plan. First of all, it's about protecting women and girls in public spaces, online, and in the domestic setting. So that's about how we respond to those challenges there and look out for victims. The second bit is about working with our partners and with women to improve prevention and victim care. So there's lots of work going on with lots of organisations locally here. Some of them are kind of established partners, but also charities and other agencies and forums and groups. The third thing is about bringing offenders to justice and improving what's called our criminal justice outcomes. So this is about helping victims on that long route through to potentially court case, where there's an offender, a perpetrator behind it as well. And what we're doing with all our different other organisations to make sure that that person gets justice for what's happened for them. And then the last bit is the bit around our culture and our professional standards. So if you wrap all those four together, there's an awful lot to do to make sure that we are delivering the very, very best service for the public.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of us know that in order to really make women feel safe, we have to change the perspectives and attitudes of men. And something that has been very apparent to me as a young woman walking around Islington and Camden is things like catcalling. That makes me feel really uncomfortable, but we're not always able or feel like we're able to report it to the police because it's a kind of low-level crime, if you get what I'm saying. So what kind of things are in place to make us feel safe? Like, are we able to report that?
Yeah, you make a really good point, Jazz. So I think right up until quite recently, there seems to have been an awful lot of emphasis on asking women to change their behaviour, when this is really about what men are doing and their behaviour and what we're saying is acceptable. Some of it, again, gets into crime, some of it very serious crime. So what we believe is the right approach, and I hope you'd agree, is that we need to tackle this early. And we're doing that through things like our work with schools officers. So all the schools in Camden and Islington now have got schools officers or named contacts there so that they can work with the teachers around raising awareness and getting young people, particularly young males, to realise what is and isn't acceptable. So there's a bit around education there, isn't there? But there's also, it is important that these matters are reported, and then we can determine whether or not there is an offence there that needs to be investigated further. Okay. There's an organisation called the Law Commission that's looking at whether or not misogyny, which is men's attitude towards women, whether or not that should become a crime in the future. So that's under review at the moment, and that's kind of out of our hands, but it's being looked at. But I think the other thing that's worth emphasising is that there are lots of schemes out there that people can report into if they've got concerns about this sort of thing, without necessarily coming to the police if they're worried about contacting the police. So there are third sector charities out there. There's Crime Stoppers. There's a programme called Fearless, which is for young people to report things there. And there's other schemes, but there's also a Safe Streets initiative, which you can search online for, which allows people, when they're out and about in the community, if they're worried about being in a particular place, they can highlight it online, and it's something that we, with the local authority, will have a look at and say, do we need to do something more there, either around the environment, or do we need to have a more of a policing presence there, which will make a difference to how people are feeling safe or not. So there's lots of different initiatives out there, and that's just a few of them.
So that would include things like the lights, for example, if it wasn't a well-lit area. Can you name like a few other things that you'd be able to report on there?
Yeah, so lighting is a really good example around there, and other areas which I think are really relevant to here is around the nighttime economy. So as society is opening up again now, more pubs and clubs are open, there's obviously lots of people there now. And we know that some things happen that are wrong or criminal within the nighttime setting. So we've got schemes like, for example, Ask Angela, which is where people can go in if they're feeling unsafe and report it to licensed premises. So there's training for bar staff and pubs and clubs and what have you, so that if someone comes in and reports something, they know how to deal with it. But of course, things like lighting is something that we have to work with our partners around, because we we don't fund that per se, but we can make recommendations about areas and CCTV and other things where it can make a real difference to how people are, and so they can go about their lives safely. That's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Going back to nightlife opening back up, recently there's been a big thing to do with injections happening, and I know that a lot of people are feeling really apprehensive about that. Is there anything that's being done in terms of keeping people safe from this? Because before it was spiking, that was like the biggest problem, and now this, you know?
So there's lots of things that we can do with licensed premises to make them safe. We work really closely, we have a licensing team, we work really closely with the local authority who grant the licence and the people who run the pubs and clubs. So through sort of training and awareness raising around what they've got going on there, I think that's a really good way of doing it. One really great bit of news coming over in the next few weeks is we've got 2 town centre teams coming live, which is extra officers who are going to be in our areas where we're busiest. They're kind of linked to our town centres, and their role is going to be really crucial in working with the pubs and the clubs and the licensed premises around this moving forward. And it'll be very much something that they'll be focusing on and doing all they can to make sure that people who go and use these places are safe, and that sort of thing doesn't happen to them.
How do you intend to stop or lower the violence in the borough, and how do you intend to build up relationships with those young people?
So your experiences in terms of growing up here on the borough are a really important insight for me and colleagues here as to what we do. I think the first thing to highlight is that violence is the Met's #1 priority. So for us here, across anywhere in the organisation, if you ask anyone what's the most important thing, tackling violence is. And we put a lot of effort behind that, and we do it with a range of other parties and organisations as well. So overall, if you look at kind of where violence is now, and the violence that you talked about there, it's lower than it was last year, and it was a couple of years ago by quite a lot. I think sometimes we have to remember that it's not always reported to us. So the bit around relationships and in terms of who we want to help improving trust with young people, it comes from different angles. First of all, we've got a really strong cadet unit here in the borough. So we've got young people who are doing activities regularly, which is constructive use of their time, which helps them also be interested in maybe joining the police further down the line.
Yeah.
The second thing, we've got a really strong youth engagement team. So they work with young people at a range of different organisations, and particularly around our youth clubs, which is a really safe setting. So that's really important as well. We've also got schools officers, which I touched on earlier. And all this is really demonstrating the fact that we in the Met see young people as so important. You know, you are our future. You're the next generation. You're the people who are going to be bringing up children in the future, and it's important that we have that rapport with you now. And this is so much to do with not just structured engagement that we do, but also just the interaction, the way that officers relate and speak to young people when they're out and about in the community. That's really important as well. So going back to the violence piece, we've got several different departments and units here that focus on violence. So within the domestic setting, home setting, community safety units, the kind of bit out on the streets with our gangs unit and our violence suppression unit, they're involved every single day in patrolling areas where we know that violence is likely to be higher, and specifically focusing on the people who are causing that and help deter them. Sometimes it requires some enforcement, sometimes it's more around diverting them and help them get into education or training or employment and that sort of thing to give them a long-term future. And we know that there's lots of complicated reasons why people will get into violence, and we're only kind of a little bit of the solution really. We have our role to fulfil around that, but we've got lots of other organisations that have to help us as well.
Okay.
One of the things I'm really interested to know is we've got a lot of young officers here, probably about the same age as yourself, maybe a couple of years older. What is it that sometimes when they put a uniform on and they've been sort of trained as a police officer makes them maybe act a little bit different that doesn't always go down with young people? I don't understand. I don't know yet what that is sometimes.
I think that it comes with the role sometimes that you have this power over people. Right. So a lot of people that, or not a lot of people, but some people that want to go into the role already have that kind of superiority complex, or a lot of young people find that that's what happens.
Right.
So then when you're on the street and you might be being stop and searched, or you might think it's wrongful, and you might think that they're just using their power to do that, which is why then when you get stop and searched rightfully, they have the same perceptions and attitudes. So yeah, I just think it's the way that they portray themselves sometimes, or the way they speak down to people.
Right. So it's much about communication, is it?
Yeah.
What do you think that young people think about the fact that we've got body-worn video now? So we've got a recording of an interaction between an officer and someone who maybe is going to be searched. Do young people think, well, it's okay because it's all going to be captured and therefore there's a kind of record of it? Does that reassure them or not?
I think it does reassure a lot of people, but there's also been a few cases where cameras have been turned off and things like that. So I know a lot of young people will still record things themselves,
Right.
but I still think it's very good to have that.
Genuinely, what do young people think about the police here? You know, do they realise and recognise that we're here to keep them safe? It's not their job to keep each other safe, or not? Do they?
It definitely depends on what area you go to. There's a lot of fancier parts of Islington that would feel more or less safe, but I know that if you go to the Cali and you speak to the young boys down there, they won't have any trust in the police whatsoever, because if they get in trouble, they're in a situation where they need to call the police, they feel like they're going to be the ones that get in trouble, or they're not going to be taken seriously because they're seen as a part of the problem.
Yeah.
So they're just not likely to call police in any situation. They're likely to take care of it themselves.
What would your advice be to me around what we do around places like that and those people?
I think something that's been really, really good is the youth engagement team going to the youth clubs and leading things like bike maintenance courses without telling them that they're police. And at first it might seem like a bit secretive, but I think it's really helped change some perceptions. A discussion I've had with a few different people is that I think if you had police officers who you know, then it would be easier to go to the police to talk to them about what's happening, or if somebody just did something over there instead of taking care of it yourself, because I feel like when it's an officer that's just in uniform that you haven't seen before, you just go to the uniform, you assume that they're going to act a certain way, and you don't end up reporting certain things. So it would definitely be a lot better.
Do you think there's interest in young people to work with us around these sorts of things more? Or put it like yourself?
I think there's definitely more interest. I think it still needs a lot more work, though.
Or to get the interest in the first place?
Yeah, to get the interest to want to build the relationships, because the police are just seen by a lot of people as a very corrupt organisation, and that's like the end of it. It's not really seen as there are good police officers and bad police officers. It's just a bad organisation. So, yeah.
So hopefully productions like this, if it's shown in the community, will help.
Yeah, exactly.
Really.
Yeah.
You're probably aware there's a big emphasis at the moment on recruiting people that are more representative of London, really. So do you think that makes a difference in how people, the relationship that can be between police and community?
Yeah, 100%. It just gives people not only someone to look up to, but someone to feel safe with. I feel like if you, especially as young people, say if I come from a black family and I have a black mum and dad, but there are only white police officers around, I don't have anybody to relate to. Whereas if there is a black police officer, I might feel safer going up to them because there's something that I identify with.
Right. And how about as a young female growing up in the borough here, do you think that you would want to see more female officers?
100%.
Would you?
That just in general, because of the attitudes towards women and obviously recent events with violence towards women.
Yeah.
Just seeing another female police officer makes me feel way safer. I personally feel like they would understand more. And I also, to a certain extent, would assume that they would be nicer. I think that is like a very big generalisation to make, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the generalisation is there, and it does make a lot of people feel safer.
Yeah. So we're aiming to get to 50-50 in terms of male-female in the organisation, and also 50-50 in terms of white or people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, which is going to be quite challenging based on the fact that the trust bit isn't quite there.
Yeah.
So we've got a long way to go in quite a short period of time. But I don't know if you were aware, because we publicised it about a month ago now. It's a bit of a fancy term. It's called a verification process. But basically, if a very unusual situation where you've got a male officer who's patrolling on their own. So normally in policing here, you've got, as you probably see them, uniformed officers in pairs, and normally officers in plain clothes in pairs. If you an unusual situation where you've got a male officer in plain clothes and they come across a member of the public, like if I came across you, if I was that officer, I would have to call the control room on my phone so that you could verify that I was a police officer.
Yeah.
So we'll put that in place now. The officer will instigate it, make it happen, rather than wait for the member of the public to say so.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know that was in place. Have you heard
Yeah,
of
I'd heard some things about that, and whilst I do think that it is good, I also think that a lot of people don't favour it, because obviously this happened after the Wayne Couzens incident, and if he were to have followed that procedure and followed the control room, they would have said that he's a police officer, so it would have been fine, and that woman still would have gotten kidnapped, and that still would have happened. Obviously these are very extreme situations, but the fact that it can still happen is very unnerving. So I feel like there needs to be something else added on top. Like, if you still don't feel comfortable, they need to send, like, I can request a female police officer to come and assist or something like that, so that I can actually know that I'll be safe.
I think we would like to be able to commit to something like that, or uniformed officers coming along. The challenge is that with lots of other calls and demand and things that officers are dealing with, we couldn't make that promise to Londoners.
Of course.
So we wanted to do something that we could commit to and deliver. And that's why we put that in place. But you do make a really interesting point there. That I think the bit that that will happen, or what is in place, is that the officers will actually be dealing with something that we've got on our system, so they'll know it's there's a call, or they're dealing with something, rather than the situation that you described where the officer was just out there without any purpose, so to speak. So, but it's something for me to take back, actually. I'm glad you're aware of it.
Yeah, no, I am. I heard about it online, various places.
We can't be everywhere all the time policing, so we do have to kind of focus on the areas that are going to make the biggest difference, which is the town centres and the kind of areas where there's lots of people. But we do need to know the more quiet locations where people go as well, or not going, changing their routes. And it's something I'd like to do with schools officers here, more around the transport routes to and from people's homes. I think it's a big part of it.
Okay, when you say transport routes, like the buses and...
When they've gone from.
Is there anything in place for people who feel kind of traumatised or need help getting through what they've experienced in terms of violence against women? Like, is there anywhere that you can refer them to, or any help that you can give them?
Yeah, I think it starts with the officer themselves and training that we've done to ensure that we show real empathy towards a victim. So we take the time to understand their circumstances, how it's affected them. But I think there are some circumstances where it's been so traumatic for a member of the public who's a victim that we would refer them to victim support services, is one example of an organisation, or other more specialist services, perhaps through the person's doctor, or there are other routes to, and there is a big network of organisations out there who can help people around that. There's probably more we can do on that, to be honest with you. I think we work a lot with the local authorities around, the councils around, after really serious events in the community. If there's been quite a traumatic incident, what the services that they can offer. And that's a kind of an approach that I think is really important, because if you get used to seeing quite traumatic incidents, you become a little bit insensitised. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, or you know of anyone who's experienced that, and that can't be right, because your brain's becoming kind of numbed, isn't it? You're getting used to seeing things that you shouldn't have to do.
I've grown up quite a lot around the boys who were part of Cali Gang.
Yeah.
So when I was younger, they were like my kind of older brother type figures. So that meant I saw a lot of them getting arrested. I saw a lot of them with drugs on them. I didn't see stabbings, but I've known a lot of people who have been stabbed, run-ins with the police, etc., etc. So that's why when I was younger, I used to hate the police. Like I didn't really know why they were there to a certain extent. And it's also like they were taking away the people closest to me. So after that, I just became really, when it came to youth violence and things that gangs were doing and like the drugs they had and things like that, it was very, very normal to me. And I almost didn't see a problem with it because of the relationship I had with those people, because they were so lovely and so nice. So those things kind of became synonymous with it.
And it can't be good, can it, really, long term?
No.
I think, like you said, the thing to do with violence and where people have been injured or hurt, and it's really horrific. If you're exposed to that on an ongoing basis, it can't be good for your views on life and how you see things. One of the things that one of the best bits of my job is I see officers at the end of their probation, their 2-year probation. I give them a certificate and talk about how they've experienced it. I've done 4 this morning actually. How's your 2 years been? And we talk about the great things and the things they find hard, and I ask them about particularly things over the last few weeks. What's it mean for you, and with the organisation? And they all end up saying how important it is that any interaction with the community is so important that it might be the only chance, the only time in that person's life when they come across a police officer. So make sure it's a really good one. Make sure it's professional. Make sure it's you caring. Make sure that you're considerate towards that person. And I think if everyone does that, then it'll be kids out in the front of their mind. That's going to be really important.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's lots of reasons why we might appeal for information following a serious crime. And people will say, well, why should I bother? Why should I bother, giving information? And what I'd say is there are lots of bits of information out there that people might think is not that important, but could be the bit that really is the last bit of the jigsaw that we need. And it doesn't always mean that they're grasping on someone by providing information. And I know that's what people are worried about particularly. I think the biggest challenge is getting people to realise that we need information to help solve and prevent crimes. It's both. It's not just about solving, it's also stopping them in the future. So by being that person who's brave enough to go against what maybe peer group pressure is saying, then they're actually doing everyone a favour, not just the police. They're actually helping their community by providing that information. And we do it, confidentially. We can be managed really carefully, so that they don't have to be known, or it's not publicised when they come forward. It can be done through different channels.
I think there's definitely a big culture of like don't snitch when it comes to gangs or people who call themselves gangs. And I definitely think it is like a very manipulative tactic, because it creates like, if I do this horrible thing, it's fine, but if you snitch, that's like worse than what I've done. I think it's very important to put out there that it is confidential and that it will be like a very kind of secretive thing, because so many people get scared about being found out and then being outcast, or way worse things than that can happen, you know? So I do think it is important for you guys to really push that message about the confidentiality part of it.
And what about, do young people, are they worried about being asked to go to court to testify?
Yes.
Or is it before that? So they're really worried about that?
That's a big thing. I think they're worried from the jump about snitching, but going to court and testifying would be a whole different avenue, because anybody could know that you're doing it. Anybody could be in the courtroom and see you. So yeah, I think that's a really scary thing, because as soon as you leave that courtroom, you could be like a target. Right.
So we need to do more around the actual process of going to court to give evidence, because the difficulty is, if you've got a crime, so you've got someone who's been a victim, in order for us to take it forward, we need the victim, of whatever age, or male or female, whatever, to say this is what's happened and potentially go to court to say this is the person who did it, which is quite a big ask, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then if they don't want to do it, we haven't done our job, have we? Well, that's what it looks like, isn't it? It looks like the police have let them down. But that's the bit we need people to do to play their role in it. And I don't know how we do that, do you?
So is there any way to, are these situations where you'd have a jury, is there any way to keep it like not public? I know there's the whole aspect of being transparent and making sure the public knows what's going on. But obviously with the jury, they're just randomly selected civilians and they would be the kind of public aspect. I think when you allow anybody to come into any courthouse to see what's going on, then I think that's when it becomes the issue, because somebody from a block that they can't go to could turn up and see that they're snitching, and then that's the end.
So in most cases that's not possible. In some very, very serious cases, the judge, and it's not the police, it's the judge will decide. We could ask the judge to consider, but the judge will decide this person can give evidence behind a curtain or something like that, or the victim could remain anonymous. So, but it's really very small number of occasions because it doesn't fit in with our criminal justice system within this country. So you're right, we've always had a court open to the public, the jury sit there, they're selected, like you and me, members of the public, and the whole trial is publicised. And that's what's difficult, isn't it? Is that people, and understandably, people are nervous about, I don't want to go through that. You know. So, but what I would say is, it's not impossible, but people need to support it in the first place, and we'll try and work out that moving forward. I mean, we do put people into protection if it's really, really serious. There's a programme to keep people safe. General things, not so much, which is hard, but let us make that decision rather than people jump the gun and jump ahead and think, oh well, I can't do that because that and that. Well, that might not happen. So report it first, and then try and get behind us to deal with it. That's what we need people to do.
Do you have any advice for young people that don't want to report it? Like, what could spur them forward to come forward about it?
Think about if they don't do it, what might happen to the next person. Could be more serious. That's what I'm saying. It's much about prevention for the future. Think about when they're older, what example they're setting to young people that they might, have or in their care. What sort of example they set into their community? Do we really want a community where everyone is so scared of everyone that it would just get out of hand, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So it's not just try and get them to think beyond their own situation. Justice is right for everyone, and it's not something that they should pick or choose whether or not it happens. It should be an absolutely the right, just a natural situation. Justice comes, but you have to be able to kind of put your hand up and say, I want this dealt with, and I'm going to get behind it. Otherwise, the problem just goes on and on and on, doesn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Can I just say it's just been a real honour for me to my first few weeks to meet you. I think you're absolutely fantastic, and I guess all I'd ask is that if you go back and speak to other young people, if you're able to let them know that we're generally here to keep them safe, that's our role, and we want to do more around building trust with young people in whatever. I'm open to any ideas, any suggestions. The great thing about arriving somewhere new is that we can have a fresh look about how things are going, and just because we've always done things in a certain way, then why not we try things different? So I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today, and hopefully we can kind of keep that going, and the introduction to other young people in the borough would be really helpful.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm really grateful to be having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming to speak to me today. I've been really, really grateful to have this conversation with you, and I think it will really benefit young people.
Brilliant, thank you.